Hello everyone and welcome to our dive-in event on harnessing the power of flexible working to support the families of today. My name is Michaela Gibson and I'm the founder of the Insurance Families Network. We're an insurance at Lloyd's cross-market network supporting working parents and carers and lobbying for best practice in the area of family-friendly workplaces. And without that, with no further ado, I'm going to hand over to Johnny Briggs from Aviva, who is our facilitator today. Thank you. Johnny.
And thank you. Welcome everybody. Good morning to those in the UK. It's a global audience, so good afternoon to those in Europe and good evening to those in Asia or wherever you may be. I'm very grateful to facilitate this. I was really keen to get involved. I think flexible working is such an important part of current and future work and can really make organisations successful. So I'm looking forward to being part of this discussion. Just some lovely stats for you. Last year we had 10,000 people registered globally for Dive In. This year obviously with COVID it's virtual, but we have 60,000 people registered for all the different events, which is absolutely phenomenal. So a real kind of well done to the Dive-In team who have organised and promoted this. I'm going to introduce you to the panel shortly, and I'm very grateful for their time. As a quick introduction, COVID has really changed the way in which we are living and that we are working, and it's highlighted the urgent need to change, which many organisations have done. The plan is that this is a practical workshop. We want to share experiences, past, present and future, of what organisations have done and what we think they should do. And fears, things that we fear in the future might not work out. We need to make sure that we can try and be aware of those to ensure that it is we can get proper and successful flexible working. And one of the things I wanted to very quickly just share is that around kind of myth busting. So at Aviva we were looking into improving flexible working as we knew that it will affect and hopefully reduce our gender pay gap. And we did some work to understand where the pay gap starts. The assumption being that, of course, it tends to then start when women take time off to have children and return slower to the workplace. And in fact, we found that wasn't the case. In fact, we found that the gender pay gap was starting really from an early, just beyond early careers. And I share that just to make sure that we're all kind of, there are myths out there around flexible working. And we just need to investigate and then be clear about the challenges we've got. And I think that highlights, certainly to us at Aviva, some of the real challenges that we have. But let me introduce you to the panel. What I'm going to do is ask them if they could just say who they are and why they've joined this webinar, and then anything else they wish to share, of which there is no need to, but if there is something they wish to share about themselves, then please do so. I should say that my name is Johnny. I work at Aviva, where I'm responsible for talent acquisition and diversity and inclusion. Been for Aviva for 4.5 years, and prior to that I was with Thomson Reuters, and prior to that Royal Bank of Scotland. But I'm going to quickly hand over to Chloe. Can you introduce yourself?
Johnny, yeah, my name is Chloe Tate and I work in a job share partnership with Katie Murray, who's also on this panel, for the Association of British Insurers. Together we have 28 years experience in communications and campaigning, and we joined the ABI to develop and lead on a job share campaign for the sector. But we're now leading the ABI's broader diversity and inclusion campaigns work. We are obviously passionate advocates for all forms of flexible working, which is why we're so pleased to be able to join this panel event today.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chloe. Katie.
Hello, hi. Yes, and as Chloe mentioned, I also work for the Association of British Insurers. My name's Katie Murray. I've got a background in communications, but together Chloe and I are leading on a range of diversity and inclusion campaigns. One of them is very much focused on reducing the gender seniority gap and improving flexible working in our sector, and we're working very closely with members across the Association of British Insurers to achieve that. So yeah, that's my background. Thank you, Johnny.
And Debs. Oh, Debs, I can't hear you. I don't know if that's just me. I'm going to quickly go and ask James to introduce himself, and then we'll go back to Debs.
I'm James Miller. I'm the editor of workingdads.co.uk, which is a website for men for whom work is not working. Is a sort of tagline that we try and work on. Basically, men who are looking to work differently, to take on part-time work, flexible work, all that sort of thing. So we have, there's a jobs board on there, but we also have a lot of best practice news, and you can read all my views on there, because I have, as editor, I get to, whenever a thought pops into my head, I get to write it up. I'm also the author of a book called Dads Don't Babysit, which is about why men should do more parenting, why they don't do more parenting, the barriers they face, and how we overcome them. Yeah, and I went part-time in 2014, and that was a very interesting experience, it's fair to say, and that really got me plugged into this sort of the issue around flexible working and families and stuff, and hence I was very keen to join this panel today.
Brilliant, thank you, James. Let me quickly just check if Debs can, we can hear Debs. Debs, can you go again, just a quick introduction?
Oh.
Yes, brilliant.
Okay, hi. I'm not entirely sure what I've done differently. So, good morning, my name's Deb Bingham. I'm the EMEA Director for a company called How Do You Do It? So we provide virtual and face-to-face coaching and consultancy to organisations who are really looking to attract, retain and progress a really diverse and inclusive workforce. We've got a particular expertise in working parents, in working carers and also flexible working, which is why we're participating today. I'm really keen to keep this really practical for all of you listening. So we've already talked about each of us sharing insights and experience. And I'd like to bring those from the different organisations that we already work with in this space.
Brilliant. Thank you, Debs. I've got a few questions that I want to put to the panel, but it's really going to work if we get questions from the audience. So we had 850 people registered for this, so if we get a question for every 50 people, we've got lots of questions. So please ask questions. This is the Q&A box. If you go in there, and we'll get through as many as we can. So please start asking questions now, but I've got a few questions I'm going to put to the panel just to get us going, if that's okay. So Kate, I'm going to come to you first. COVID has changed the way workplaces see flexible working. How can we harness this opportunity?
Yeah, before COVID, flexible working was becoming more common, but not across all sectors. And there was a general sense that physically being in an office and working from at least 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, was the optimal approach. This was a significant barrier for women in particular, as 90% of those who work part-time in our sector are women. Women also take on the bulk of caring responsibilities at home, whether for children or elderly relatives, and having the ability to work flexibly in a meaningful way makes this balancing act much easier. But the good news is that this pandemic has completely transformed how most employees in our sector work, and there is a new normal emerging. The emphasis is no longer on where and when we work, it's about getting the job done. And for many people, this has meant working from home and adapting their regular hours to balance work with caring responsibilities, particularly with the school closures that have taken place. And some employers who were previously reticent about flexible working have seen how it can work in practice, and they have witnessed good results too. So I think the key to harnessing this shift is for employers to consult with their employees and rewrite their flexible working policies now and then on a permanent basis, not just in response to this pandemic. So everyone should be allowed to work from home if they want to do so and their role allows it. They should also be allowed to adapt their hours and to embrace job sharing and part-time working. Making this change will help create a level playing field for a wide variety of workers. It will also help employers in 4 main ways. So first of all, it will make organisations more resilient. If we are faced with pandemics, natural disasters and other significant challenges in the future, then we need to be ready to respond, and having a workforce that can quickly adapt and effectively work from home is vital. And then secondly, in order to remain competitive and attract and retain the best talent, companies need to compete and ensure that they are offering their employees a wide range of meaningful, flexible working options. In a recent survey, it showed that 58% of employees said that they feel more productive when they work from home. And there's also evidence that around half of employees who are currently working from home are planning to request the ability to do so on a permanent basis. Employers need to adapt in order to meet this new demand. Thirdly, evidence shows that an increase in flexible working increases well-being and improves diversity too. And at present in the insurance and long-term savings sector, just 25% of those at executive and board level are women. The Gender Seniority Gap report, published by the Association of British Insurers, shows that a permanent increase in the variety of flexible working options, particularly job sharing, will help women progress their careers. And this is the right thing to do, and it makes sound business sense too. So some recent studies from the Boston Consulting Group and McKinsey show that increasing the diversity of leadership teams leads to more and better innovation and improved financial performance too. And finally, if the proposed new employment bill goes through, then companies will be required to improve their flexible working policies and can only reject a request for flexible working if there's a clear business case to do so. It's much better for employer branding and the reputation of our sector to lead the way with flexible working. And we have a really great opportunity to be on the front foot and make these changes now. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. James, do you have an answer to that question?
Fill the next hour with an answer to that question if you really want. I think it's worth pointing out at the top of this is that, as you say in the question, COVID has changed a lot of things. And the one thing, it does present an opportunity, but you have to be clear that all of us would rather we hadn't gone through what we've just gone through to get to the place where we are. But we are where we are, so now we have to try and make the opportunity and build back better. I think the biggest change has been that it's shown that flexible working works. You know, at the start of the year, there was a lot of a lot of employers were wary about flexible working partly because they didn't trust their employees, which was weird and something I've shouted about a lot, saying, you know, if you don't trust your employees to get the work done, then that's a recruitment problem, not a flexible working problem. But what has happened over the last 6 months is we've seen, as Katie mentioned, productivity has not collapsed at all. In fact, there was a CIPD report came out last week that showed 2/3 of employers reported that productivity had either gone up or stayed the same. So we know it works, and of course you have to remember that through the lockdown, that wasn't normal flexible working. That was juggling home working and flexible working, and I think we sometimes forget it. Back in March, it was really scary. You know, a lot of your brain power was taken up with what's going to happen next. So I think the big thing is that employers can see that it works is the big change. Now, how do we take that forward? I think one of the other interesting findings from that CIPD report from last week is that a lot of employers are open to home working, but not other sorts of flexible working, because they've seen that home working works, but they're still wary about things like annualized hours, job shares, all sorts of different ideas. And flexible working has to take in lots of different ways of working. It has to be genuinely flexible. So we need to see that change. We need to see employers sort of open up their minds in that regard. And key to the whole last sort of 6 months has been communication. In your house, you have to communicate with your partner and your kids and say, you know, I'm going into a meeting. You need to get on with whatever work you have to do, you know, and figure out how you're going to divvy up the day. And you have to communicate. Employers need to be communicating to their employees, saying, well, we quite like flexible working now. Here's our new policy. And employees need to be communicating with their bosses, saying, as Katie said, you know, I've quite liked actually being around my kids more over the last 6 months. I don't like commuting so much. I want flexible working. How can we make it work? And if you just communicate, and line managers are a big part of that, then I think we can build back better and get to a more flexible workplace in general.
Brilliant. Thank you, James. Got a slightly odd scenario in the next question, because I'd like to answer part of it myself. So it's a kind of odd chat show where you know, I will ask a question, but I'm going to go to Debs first, and then I would like to add just some comments myself. But Debs, what does a successful flexible working organisation look like?
For on different organisations and industries that we've worked with, it actually echo some of the lovely things James has just said in terms of some of the themes I can see across those organisations. We've really made some really positive strides already, even pre-COVID. We're looking to create a much more flexible and agile culture. So the first one would be about role models, and it's about having visibility of some really broad role models here. So we're not talking about, I think historically some organisations see flexible working as the domain of working parents and working carers, and in particular women. However, those who have made greater strides are recognising that those role models have to be embracing a wide variety of different types of flexibility. So it's not just about where you're working, it might be when you're working and how you're working as well. There also needs to be different levels of seniority in amongst those role models. And we also need to be looking at different levels of motivation. So your reason for embracing flexible working, so that it doesn't fall into this trap of being purely about having a caring responsibility as well. So the role modelling and talking and actively promoting that diversity of role models is really important in those organisations. The other theme I pick up on is the bit around communication. So if I think about those organisations, again, who are making good strides and good progress, it's those who are recognising that individuals and managers at a team level need real support around the communication. So they are encouraging environments where they can have really open conversations about what flexibility means for them and how they can make it work. So you're thinking about the individual being able to talk about their needs, but equally the manager representing the business in terms of there is a business need here as well, and it needs to win for both parties. So being able to have that open engagement and working at a team level is really important. So there'd be two of the key themes I see in very successful organisations.
Brilliant. Thanks, Debs. And just from my perspective, to kind of add to that, I think first thing is to have the policies in place. But that is absolutely, that's the minimum. So it's an organisation, I would say that we've got some outstanding flexible working policies. But if the practice doesn't allow you to enact them, then actually they're no use. So Debs' point around role modelling is essential. My view is that you need to make sure that, first of all, the policies are wide enough. So we've recently, like a number of other insurers, have now said that every single role should be advertised with the ability to apply with flexible working. Because what we found out is that when somebody started to take any form of flexible working, they then stopped progressing. And that's wrong. So what we've got to make sure we're doing is we're taking that flexible working and we're ensuring that people are moving on from those particular jobs for their development and their progression and for the better of the organisation. It's got to work for the person, but it's got to work for the organisation as well. So we need to be quite sensible in terms of how we operate the type of flexible working that we've got. So again, is it affecting the customer? Is it affecting the team? Let's make sure it works. And there's lots of ways to do that to make sure it will work. The key to me to all of it is following up on Deb says about role model. It's good leadership. So where it's going to work, my fear going into the kind of post-COVID period will be we will obviously have a lot more people that will be working remotely. It's quite obvious, as most organisations are talking about maybe 60% of the time being in an office and the rest not, which for many is down from 95, 100% of being in an office. But if all of a sudden the leader looks and he finds that the room that he's sitting in the office is full of men and all the people that are at home are women that happen to be mothers or carers, then that's not working. So it's about leaders identifying and looking out for these things and making sure that they can then see where they need to step in, and they need to make sure again that it's working for all the parties involved, but they are making calls about ensuring that everybody is still equal. Because at the moment, with us all being on screens, it does feel as if that's the case. But let's be careful when we go back to the office. Okay, next question. I'm going to go back to Debs. Des, what do you feel the barriers are to flexible working, and how can organisations help respond to these?
So again, building on something you just said just then, Johnny, about leadership, I think sometimes in organisations where I've seen there's been a struggle around translating a desire for flexible working into a reality is where there can be a disconnect between senior leadership buying into it, but actually the middle managers who are having to deliver on it. And that comes down again to that investment in them having the skills in terms of actually being able to effectively lead and manage flexible workers. I think one of the things we are hearing consistently at the moment across a number of organisations is that managers and leaders who had a really effective skill set around that role previously have recognised they do need additional or slightly tweaked skills to manage a flexible working team, particularly as so many of us are working remotely at the moment. And using those current skills aren't exactly what you need to be absolutely effective. So there's definitely a bit of a disconnect sometimes between a senior leadership message and the actual delivery around flexible working. The other bit is linked to the role model piece, and that is the myth-busting exercise, and that is this piece around really sort of doing away with some of the myths around what flexibility means for people. It's incredibly individual, and it means that you need to have an ongoing dialogue with individuals. It's not about one conversation. Particularly, I think, again, we fall into this trap of having a conversation predominantly with mothers when they come back from their period of leave to talk about what they would like to do in terms of flexible working. It's often raised as part of that conversation, but we don't mirror that with our fathers. We equally aren't now having that conversation with people for a whole variety of reasons. So we really need to be thinking about flexible working in a much, much broader sense in terms of who will want to access it and what their needs are going to be around this as well.
Brilliant. Thank you, Debs. I'm going to go to Chloe now to ask if you could tell us more about your job share partnership and the benefits it can bring to an organisation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So Katie and I joined the ABI as a job share partnership in November last year. This is actually our first role as a job share, though we've known each other for over 5 years, and we're also the ABI's first job share. So for those of you not so familiar with the concept, job sharing basically involves 2 employees individually working part-time to cover one full-time role. Not all roles are suitable for part-time working, but they can be done as part of a job share, and anyone can job share. So it can therefore benefit a wide range of people. And of course, you know, this event is touching on parents and carers in particular, but it goes broader than this. You know, people who want perhaps portfolio careers, so for example, new graduates, business owners, people who want to study, volunteer, or pursue a hobby at the same time as working, those who are close to retirement or who want to come out of retirement, perhaps those who have a disability or even a hidden disability, or those who want to focus on their well-being or their mental health. And there are different ways of splitting the job share too. So Katie and I work 3 days a week each, with Wednesday as a handover day, and we work a pure job share. So we're both across all elements of the role. And in other job shares, for example, you know, one person you can have 2 days a week, another working 3. You can work, for example, a hybrid model where you're accountable for different elements of the role. In essence, there's not one right way to job share. Often it's what suits the partnership and what works for the organisation. So talking about the benefits for employers, these are pretty wide-ranging, and you know, we've touched on this, you know, the importance of having access to a wider and diverse talent pool, and there's plenty of evidence, some of which Katie cited from McKinsey and the Boston Consulting Group, around how important it is for organisations to be more diverse to increase, for example, their innovation, their profitability. Job sharing might also help you retain valued employees who might otherwise have left an organisation where you're not able to sort of provide that option for them. You have more resilient teams with high levels of energy across the week as you sort of pass the baton to the next person, 2 sets of skills and experience. And there's some interesting research from the civil service which shows that people who job share actually have higher levels of well-being compared with people who work full-time or part-time. So when the COVID-19 crisis hit, just to give a practical example, when we went into lockdown, Katie and I both found ourselves, as many did, juggling childcare and work, and we found we were able to work together to flex our hours in a complementary way, so that the role and our responsibilities were still covered. Now, just to sort of wrap up my answer to your question, Johnny, I did want to mention the Job Share project, which is a campaign that Katie and I are leading on to raise awareness of and embed job sharing within the insurance and long-term savings sector, which we plan to launch in early 2021. And the main aims of the project are to try and increase diversity in the sector by recruiting and retaining the best and most diverse talent, to try and help to reduce that gender seniority gap, to make the most of that increased focus that we're seeing on flexible working, which obviously we've mentioned, and also kind of strengthen the reputation of our sector and showcase member firms as inclusive places to work. Now, as part of it, and if enough ABI members pledge their support, we hope to launch the first private sector job share portal in the UK, where employees of ABI members will be able to sign up to find their perfect job share partner who has a similar level of skills and experience and who also works for an ABI member, and they will then be able to jointly apply for roles. So basically, if you'd like more information about this campaign, we'd be really delighted to talk to you. And I think our joint email address will be displayed at the end of this session, so please do get in touch. Thanks.
Thank you, Chloe. I have one more question before we come out to you, the audience, and I'm delighted to see that we've already had loads of questions, which is going to challenge my ability to multitask, and we could have some comical moments coming up. So stick in, keep asking questions. But I've got one final question I'm going to go to first to James. James, the difference in flexible working requests for men and women and how business better support fathers in the workplace. Tell me, how easy is it for dads to speak up in this particular space?
It's not that easy is the answer. Now, men have an awful lot of advantages, let's be honest. You can look around, but this, and it's not to ignore all those advantages, but there's definitely an issue here. There is, for a start, there is stigma about it. I was speaking to Jasmine Kelland, who does a lot of work on this down at the University of Plymouth last week, who she got into it because her partner had gone to ask for flexible working, and his boss had said, "What's your wife doing that she can't look after the children?" And that is just one example of many. I mean, that's just, she did a lot of research on this, but she talks about it. I'm sure there are lots of men who have examples of this and haven't shared it. There are examples in my book of exactly that, of men being told that if they ask for flexible working, it will affect their careers. Well, welcome to the world of women. I think a lot of women will recognise that. So there is certainly a stigma about it. Men sometimes don't help themselves because when it comes to flexible working requests, we know that according to the official statistics, it's around 4 or 5% of men have flexible working arrangements. And the figures for women are significantly higher. It's more like a sort of quarter to a third. But men have informal flexible working requests. They don't fill in the paperwork, and as Dev said, go and have that conversation. What they do is, traditionally on the golf course or in the canteen or whatever, say, "Can I nip off early to go to the nativity on Friday," or whatever. Nativity, they're the thing from 2019. We don't have them anymore, do we? But it's that sort of thing where, as you mentioned about role modelling, men need to make the flexible applications, have the conversation, and get it all down in writing, and then talk about why they're doing it, which is to look after their children, which should be the most natural thing in the world. Now, for the last 6 months, men have been at home doing more childcare, and that is a big step forward on the route towards sort of equality around this. And as a lot of us have mentioned, a lot of men are now saying that they're going to ask for flexible working when they get back to work, whatever that's going to mean. I mean, now that looks like it might not be till next spring, so we'll have to see how that pans out, and we have to make sure that we keep up the pressure on that, make sure men follow through and apply for flexible working, and that companies make it easy for them to do so, because as we've mentioned, there's so many benefits of men and women working equally, both in the home and out of the home. Again, they're all set. I don't want to sound like I'm plugging my book, but they are all in my book. I could just as easily start plugging Aviva, because I know Aviva do an awful lot of the good stuff on this in terms of role modelling, in terms of the paternity leave, which has shown that there's a demand for this stuff. If you offer it, men will use it if you make it easy for them. So it's there. We just need to be careful to keep up the pressure at this moment to make sure it's easy for men to follow through and to achieve that equality, which is better for everyone. There are benefits for men, women, children, and the economy, and the last of them is not to be sniffed at, given where we're heading in the next few months. if we can have more flexible working amongst men and women and achieve greater equality.
Brilliant. Thank you, James. I don't think I've ever seen a bookshelf with just one book on it, but that, if anyone hasn't noticed, that is Dad's Don't Babysit's it's James's book, so please do look that up. Final, just Debs, is there anything you want to add on top of that to what James has just said?
It's really underlining what he said. So that piece about gender neutrality, so whether it's in your policies, and I mean, Johnny, again, you can talk to Aviva's attitude to this, but it's stripping out the gender bias that we often see if we think about parental leave and what's offered to women versus what's offered to men. So that can make a real difference there. But in terms of the day-to-day practicalities, it's around thinking about the conversations that you are having in organisations, and again, making sure that you are having the same conversations with all parents, not just thinking, having that sort of assumption that there are women taking on more of the caring, and therefore that conversation is predominantly with the women in your team. So really thinking about splitting that gender neutrality out there. And we've already talked about role models and the visibility, and I just think that's such an important point in terms of really making sure that once those dads, because James is absolutely right, if I think about the dads we've been working with for the last 14 years, there is a real concern that it is career limiting to talk about a flexible working option. And they look at their female counterparts. Many, if you think about a graduate intake, they look at those who've been their peers throughout their career, and they get to a certain point and they do feel that they don't want to maybe fall into the same traps that they see maybe some of the females have fallen into because of flexible working. But they are absolutely engaged in playing a role at home. They just tend to be doing it under the radar. So they are going, as James said, use the example of the nativity, they are doing the pick-up from nursery and so on, and particularly more so than ever at the moment when we are working from home. And we're hearing overwhelmingly that they do want this to continue, but there is an element of bravery in terms of them actually speaking up in terms of formalising some of those work arrangements and being very open with others about the fact that they are going to be working flexibly, and these are the reasons that they want to do that.
Thank you, Debs. Just to add to that, our experience when we introduced equal parental leave, which means that it's 26 weeks for parents, whatever the circumstance in terms of taking on a child. And what we found is in the first year is that the average for a female was 26 weeks taking off fully paid. But interestingly, the average for a male was 21 weeks. So that was saying that males were coming back into our office early. So we investigated to find out why that was. And interesting that they were very honest and said, missed the office, feared for their job, feared what people were thinking about them. All the things that women have had for decades and decades and decades. But actually they were honest enough to come back and say that's what it is. So we're learning from that. And the biggest thing around role models is this isn't necessarily about leaders. This is people that have come back after 26 weeks off and tell their colleagues what it's like to come back into the office environment. That return to work is quite a daunting experience, getting a lot of apprehension, and the sharing that they've been able to do. It's in small pockets. We're talking about, totally across a 30,000 employee company, we've had around 500 that have come back in terms of males, but that starts to grow the story, and that's what really, really helps us. So that's been really important. Thank you all. So we're going to go to the questions that you have submitted to us, which is brilliant. There's lots, so I'm going to go quite quickly, and I'm going to try and push them to get them around the kind of panel. So I'm going to come to you, Katie, first of all, if that's okay. One of the first question here: do you have any tips for working from home with children? I think the final two words are the key parts to that particular question. Katie, any tips from working from home with children?
Well, I'm very lucky to be working in this job share partnership with Chloe Tate, and that's really helped us balance when we had to look after our own children during the lockdown period and when the schools were closed. That helped us balance those responsibilities. So my husband had to reduce his working hours. I changed my hours, so sometimes I was starting work at 7 a.m. and going on till 11 o'clock in the morning, then taking a break to look after the kids, and then starting again to work late at night. And then on other days my husband was doing those sorts of hours. And I also found at times that I was spreading my work, rather than doing my 3 days a week, I would spread it across 7 and work at weekends. And we're lucky that the Association of British Insurers, where we work, we're very accommodating and very flexible. But actually in that job share partnership, it really took the pressure off. I've got a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old. Chloe has 2 boys the same age. And together we were able to navigate those challenges because of our job share partnership. It also meant that for the organisation, you know, we balanced any leave that we took. There was never a day where the role wasn't covered. We were able to provide that continuity of service for our colleagues and for the members that we work with.
Right, thank you. I'm going to move on to the next one. James, this one I'm going to put to you. How do we change the perception that flexible working means working 9 to 5 from home? We've touched on some of this.
Do people still think that, you know, after the last, I mean, I've spoken to people, you know, I speak a lot of people who said, you know, they've had like 20 years of change has happened in the last 6 months in terms of attitudes towards flexible working. I think, yeah, previously, I think people would have thought it was 9 to 5, just working in a different place. But, you know, that speaks to Katie and Chloe's experience, I think, as well, and, you know, and probably all of ours. You know, people have been working earlier in the morning or later at night across 7 days. That raises issues around burnout and switching off. And I know that, you know, there's an individual thing about what works for everyone, but there is a question out of the experience of the last 6 months around that, about being able to actually turn the computer off at some point. So I think, I'm not sure there is that 9 to 5 anymore. I suspect there is in some companies, but there certainly shouldn't be, because, as I say, in a lot of companies, it's become clear that you have to work when you can. And it's about outputs, isn't it? I mean, this is how we're measuring productivity. It's not about 9 to 5. I know there's people have spoken about leaving the computer on and scheduling emails to go at a certain time, you know, the sort of digital equivalent of the jacket on the back of the chair. But it's about measuring outputs, and I think, you know, that works for everyone. I mean, literally, that's what all employers and employees want to be measuring, is if you get the job done. It doesn't really matter when or where or how. So I think I don't want to sound like I'm criticising the questioner, but I'm not sure that 9 to 5 still holds, or if it does, I'm not sure it will hold for the next 6 months. By next spring, I certainly hope that attitude will have crumbled.
I think it's also important to highlight that flexible working, I think there's an assumption when we're talking about it because of COVID that flexible working means working from home. And it doesn't. Flexible working it's got so many different kind of routes, and it's important to make sure that we follow what James said in terms of its output. But some people really want to. Our offices are open. People really want to go into that's fine, you know, and you can work in an office flexibly, you can do different things. So I think for me it's really important to maximise the full array of flexible working opportunities that there are, which, you know, again, it's not necessarily whether it be the kind of you have to work 9 to 5 or you have to necessarily work at home. Going to move on, so we get another question. I'm going to come to you for this one, Debs. Do you think this new normal will persist past this pandemic? And how do we stop going back to old habits? There's actually 3 questions here. Do you think some employers still want teams back in the office and see this as a temporary measure?
Katie, I think, already has cited, and Chloe, the research that's being done that's showing that productivity is actually not being detrimentally impacted by the fact that we are working remotely. So in many ways, this has been sort of a global experiment around flexible working that people have been forced into. So I think data is going to be one of the key things that help employers understand that flexible working has a huge amount of commercial benefit for them, particularly if they think about employees in terms of attracting and retaining their very best employees, being really competitive, they're out there in the market. So there's a real commercial win for organisations that I think should prevent people rolling back into old habits. I think the other thing is there's going to be sort of a bottom-up demand. From all the surveys that are being presented at the moment in the media, we know that employees are saying that they are enjoying many of the elements of flexible working, which I know primarily at the moment is about location in terms of working from home. And to your point, Johnny, I think as we can move forward through and beyond the pandemic, I think we will see a lot more hybrid working where people are blending where they work, the hours that they work due to their individual circumstances. I think one of the things that's going to be so key is about individuals feeling empowered to talk very openly about what they need in terms of that flexibility, but talking about it in a position from having understood what the business needs. So recognising that the business still does need to meet those outputs, teams need to meet those outputs, and so if you can come at it having thought through from an individual's perspective perspective on how you're contributing to that, then you are much more likely to have a much more positive conversation about flexible working on a long-term basis.
Yeah. Just, I'm not one of those that sees the death of the office. I think it's exactly as Debs is saying, that it's going to be a whole balance. It's about having a conversation. I think everybody has some responsibility to make sure that it works for all the parties concerned. And you know, I've been back in our office, and obviously that's going to stop. But actually that worked for me, and that was what I wanted to do. And I think we need to make sure that no one feels pressurised because I've gone in, but equally that make sure that everybody has something that kind of suits them, which will be around, funnily enough, the word flexible. I've got another question. I'm going to come to you, Chloe, if that's okay. The questioner says, I'm very pro-flexible working, but I always get asked what I will do about ensuring juniors progress and don't miss out on all the benefits of overheating of conversation. Do you have any recommendations about this?
Yeah, I mean, do you mean in terms of sort of more junior members of staff who want to embrace flexible working themselves but are perhaps worried that it might hamper their careers in some way? I
think the question is more, and this is my interpretation, is that you're more thinking about people maybe in their early careers when they're in the office, they're very enthusiastic, but maybe their managers are all working a bit more flexibly, so they're kind of, are they missing out in some of that conversation? And then if somebody more junior does tend to then go work flexibly, what happens? Because I suspect the majority of people with early careers may well be in offices because they see it as a social as much as a working environment, and it's how to keep in with those. I think that's where the question is coming from.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I can totally understand sort of those concerns, and certainly in terms of the colleagues that sort of Katie and I work with, you know, we have colleagues who are younger and who are progressing their career, who certainly sort of have been keen to get back to the trial period of the office opening sort of in these recent weeks, and are keen to kind of have those face-to-face interactions. I think, you know, in terms of how Katie and I have tried to manage that, it's really been about sort of setting up those, making sure that the dialogue is there and having those kind of key sort of forms of communication between team managers and kind of employees within a team, you know, sort of peer-to-peer. I think, you know, one thing about flexible working that maybe we haven't touched on so much is how you kind of establish those processes and those procedures when you have people doing different things in the flexible working sense, and you have that sort of hybrid approach to flexible working. Some people in the office, some people at home, people at different stages of their careers, and yeah, actually making sure that sort of managers themselves are sort of equipped and have the training in order to be able to sort of set up those modes of communications with their teammates, to have regular chats, and to actually maybe continue the things with employees that perhaps in a time of crisis, as we've experienced earlier this year, maybe fall by the wayside a little bit. So those personal development conversations, keeping those up, keeping them up on a regular basis, having that kind of dialogue with people that you manage. You know, how do you want to handle this? How do you want to have these conversations? How often do you want to have them? Kind of via which medium? So again, I guess that the communication, the quality of the communication, the regularity of the communication, and just making that as open and honest and regular as you possibly can, so that you have the dialogue there and can address issues and concerns about progression and development as soon as they arise.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chloe.
Johnny, can I just quickly add to that?
Please,
on a practical note? So something that I've seen work in a few organisations who are doing this really well is something maybe called a team charter or a team pact or a team agreement. And it's a live document that the team shares, which each person in the team talks about their need for flexibility, you know, their preferences for being, how they like to be communicated with, talks about maybe core hours that they do, where they have some hard stops, for example, if they've got a specific boundary, and where they can be flexible. And that incorporates everything from reduced hour working patterns to the hours, you know, how they're allocating their hours across the day, if there's a specific time of the day they're suddenly unavailable. And because it's something that's kept on the team agenda as a standing item, people feel that they can check in with how everybody's going. Equally, they can see very quickly what people's preferences are and actually work to you know, to make sure that they are inclusive in terms of how somebody wants to be communicated with, for example, somebody's interest in certain projects and opportunities. So a very practical tool that I have seen to really enforce what Chloe is saying about communication and the need for that open dialogue is actually sitting down as a team. And if it means having somebody to facilitate that discussion, so be it, just to really ensure that everybody can talk very openly about what works for them in terms of their flexible needs, but recognises what the team needs to output as a whole.
Brilliant. Thank you, Debs. Kate, I'm going to come to you for this particular question. The questioner says, I'm 27 and want to start a family. How can I best prepare myself for leaving and re-entering the workforce while still showing I'm eager to climb the ladder and prove I'm the best person for promotion opportunities regardless of my future flexible working needs?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things when you are on a period of parental leave or maternity leave, you know, I know that I had keeping in touch days when I was on maternity leave a while ago now, and I kept up to date with sort of best practice in those moments where I had to read something. I listened to webinars. I just kept an eye on what was going on with my industry and best practice. And I think that's a really good thing to do. You can still keep those relationships with your colleagues, and then when you return to work at a time that's right for you, and have a conversation about what your flexible working pattern might be. If you are going to pursue something like job sharing, then, you know, I think that's a really positive thing to do. If you're going to work on a part-time basis, again, it's about making sure that you're clear with your colleagues about when you're available and keeping up to date with things. But also, I think confidence is a really big issue. You can have a real confidence knock after a period of time away from the office if you've never had that before. You can feel as if you've sort of been left behind a little bit, and then you might need to take some time to catch up. But it's important to know that you will get back to where you were, and just to sort of, you know, keep going. But I think keeping your confidence up is really important, and keeping up to date whilst you're away can help you with that.
Brilliant. Thank you. James, I'm going to come to you with this question. Could you give any examples of different ways you think employers could be more flexible, other than flexible hours and home working? What sort of other flexible working is available you think people should look to consider?
There are obviously practical considerations here. You know, you can do annualized hours where you work a certain amount of hours in the year. You can do term time working, although again, you know, who knows when term time is these days. There are options around that. But you know what? I think actually beyond the practical, I think there's I don't know, not even a philosophical, but I think what would help flexible working most is to take forward the empathy that I think a lot of employers have learnt over this last 6 months. You're sitting in my front room right now. People have been having meetings essentially in each other's kitchens and all the rest of it. Their cats have walked across the keyboard. Mine hasn't yet, but it could happen at any moment. They've had children bursting into meetings. They've had to say, look, I can't, I'm just stressed out. I can't do any work this morning, for example. And I think what we need going forward in particular is for employers to really take on board that empathy and understand that, I think that has happened, that people are not just units of economic production. They are humans with, families, and this session is about families, but there are, of course, people with older care responsibilities, or people who really like running marathons, and it's really good for their mental health to get out and do a 3-hour run every morning or whatever. There are lots of consideration. People are complex, and I really hope, I appreciate the questioner might be looking for something a bit more practical, but I really hope the main thing that would really help fuel flexible working and support families would be empathy amongst employers and amongst colleagues, because a lot of people who've done flexible working, including myself, will know the look you might get from a colleague as you leave early on a Tuesday afternoon or whatever, But again, I think hopefully the experience of the last few months has helped people to understand that we all have responsibilities outside work, and that empathy could really help to embed flexible working going forward.
Johnny, could I come in here, please?
Please.
I also wanted to just share this example. There's a really good opportunity for employers here just on attracting and retaining the best talent. Zurich, one of the Association of British Insurers members, opened up all roles as open to job sharing and part-time working last year, so pre-COVID. they got an almost immediate 45% increase in the number of people applying for roles. And that gave them access to this huge talent pool that they didn't have before. And it wasn't just women applying for those roles, although there was a massive increase in the number of women applying for the senior roles. Men were really interested in it too. And I think if employers want to have access to that widest talent pool and retain the best talent for the longest period possible and avoid things like costly recruitment fees, I think that embracing flexible working in all of its forms is the way forward.
Thanks, Katie. I've got two quick questions on job share, so I'm going to come to our job sharers. Firstly, I'm going to come to Chloe, if that's okay. Chloe, recommendations for helping reluctant managers or leaders to understand job share. So, for example, handover day being viewed as a waste of time or a lack of productivity, to headcount increased costs, etc. What would you say back to that reluctant manager?
So we've talked a bit on this panel about the importance of using evidence, and that definitely applies to job sharing as well. So some of the reports that Katie and I quoted, from McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group, around actually, job sharing as being a way of attracting a diverse workforce and actually increasing sort of your bottom line. And then when it actually comes to, how it might work in practice, there's lots of kind of examples of sort of successful job shares out there who made it work. Where on Katie and my handover day, we spend maybe an hour on actual handover, and then we're actually in a position to go off and do different things. So I might be writing the briefing, and Katie might be, talking on a panel event or whatever it is it might be. So we have that ability to kind of bring sort of two sets of skills and experience and to almost be in two places at once. So I think it's very kind of clearly sort of setting out the evidence, setting out how it will work in practice, how you want to make it work for the organisation, and then also thinking sort of through very clearly, sort of making the point that in terms of problem solving, because you're working as a mini team, you have the ability to address challenges and solve problems together before necessarily having to escalate them to your line manager. So there's that kind of element to it as well. So I think just being kind of setting out your very clear business case with the benefits and maybe throwing in a couple of examples of where job sharing has worked in other organisations and other sectors, it could be really beneficial.
Brilliant. I've got one final question, which I'll put to Katie, because it's a job share, and then see if then bring us all back together. Katie, it's a great question. What happens with job shares when one person wants to leave or tries to get promoted? So kind of a job share divorce. How does that work?
Well, as Chloe is listening in, I'll be careful about how I answer the question. No, I think Chloe and I, our careers are going very much in the same direction, and if there was a promotion that we wanted to go for together, we would apply as a job share. And the great thing about job sharing is that you have a wider set of skills and experience together. Like together, Chloe and I have got 28 years communications experience in campaigns, in marketing, a wide variety of areas. And actually, it means that when a challenge comes up, we're better placed to deal with it because we can draw on each other's experience, each other's networks. So I think if a job share partnership is working really well, you'll just keep climbing the career ladder together, which is why it's part of the key to reducing the gender seniority gap in the insurance and long-term savings sector. Lots of roles can't be done, or at present are seen as impossible to do on a part-time basis. But if you've got two people job sharing, you can do those senior roles together and continue progressing in your career. And then I suppose, if for whatever reason two people want to change their working arrangement, perhaps one person wanted a job share for a period and then go full-time, that's something that you would discuss together as well. And the great thing about this portal that Chloe and I are hoping to deliver for the Association of British Insurers and all of our members is that they would then just go onto that portal and find a new job share partnership.
They would remarry. Yes, I think that's wonderful. I was delighted you're going to plug in about the portal. I was hoping that would come in at the end. We've had lots and lots of questions. I'm really sorry we have not been able to get through them, but I'm so pleased that we did get through what we have and that we've had such interest and enthusiasm from you. Thank you very, very much. I just want to go back to each member of the panel and ask them this simple question. What do you hope that participants will take away from today's conversation? And I'm going to first go to Debs, if that's okay.
So for me, what I'd really like people to take away is there's a huge opportunity now to actually really make great progress across many industries and many sectors on the take-up of flexible working. But I think the important part of that is recognising that we all have a role to play in this. This isn't just something for leaders of organisations to be considering. So whether you're a leader, whether you're a manager, whether you're part of a team, or whether as an individual you want to embrace flexible working, or you will support others in your team who want to embrace flexible working, all of us can play a role in really making this the new way that we're going to be working in the future.
Brilliant. Thank you, Debs. Katie?
I think that by embracing flexible working, we can have a brighter future and make work better for people who have various challenges or who have caring responsibilities. And I think, if everyone considers flexible working for them, then, that's something that could really improve workforces in the future.
Chloe?
Yeah, when I came back from my second maternity leave, I realised I just wanted to work in a different kind of way, and in the last few years I have done that, and I hope that people watching this panel can take away that kind of sense of possibility and the idea that actually you might consider a form of flexible working that you might not have tried before, and that really works for you.
Brilliant. And finally, James?
Tax, I think. We're all here making the case. We all want to help. As Deb said, we need to work together. I'm assuming we're all on LinkedIn. My website is workingdads.co.uk. There's lots of content there. Come and talk to me, and I'm happy to help if I can. Come and talk to us, ask us questions. And if we can help, we will, because I think, as others have said, there's a real opportunity here to make things better, and I think we're all very keen to be involved in that process.
Right. Can I thank you all for your participation, for your enthusiasm, for your knowledge. It's been really, really excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for Michaela for setting up this particular session. And the final thing I would just say is, be flexible in terms of flexible working. That's part of the point. It's about making sure it's right for the individual, the organisation, and obviously the customer, wherever that person is. So it's being a bit thoughtful in regard to what's going to work. But thank you all for listening, and I think the contact details will now be shown on the card, and I hope you enjoy the rest of Dive In.